for all interested provinces. The first SLA contract was signed back as 1979 by the National Department of Health and then followed by the 1987 contract renewed by the provinces. Do you see that?
That is correct.
That will be a correct
That is correct version.
reflection
Council.
of the
Can you
provision.
just qualify the document? What document is this, Council? Can you just put that on record?
The document is referred to as a project plan. It starts from 2789. That is a Department of Health's document.
And who compiled the document, do we know?
The signatory there, it's Dr. Manamela, the director of the mental health
Sure.
at the time.
Very well, you may proceed. It just always helps for us to
Yes.
record what document we're dealing with every time,
Thanks, Judge.
and particularly who's the author, the composer of the document.
Yes. Thank you. Then it goes on further and says, and refers to the number of years that this contract has been in existence for about 36 years,
That's correct.
as at the time when that document was produced. In fact, the signatory to the document is on page 2824. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it's the department's document.
Yes, it is. It was developed by the Department of Health.
Thank you. Then, whilst this contract was in existence, before we get to that, on the next page, that is 2793, I'm sorry, of this document. 2793.
I've
Are you
got
there?
it, Council.
And on your middle right, there's a reference to Randfontein Care Center, West Rand Care Center, Webward, Waverley Care Center, Baneng, and so on. Will this be one of your facilities, some of your facilities?
All of them are or were our facilities, or are. Where, because I'm no more employed by Life Esidimeni.
Oh, yes.
Yes, but they are still existent.
Okay. And for which region are these facilities?
These were in Gauteng. As you can see, Baneng would be here in the south, Waverley in the east, Bedford in the east, and Rand West and Randfontein in the west region.
So you had 5 of them in Gauteng.
In Gauteng, yes, Council.
Thank you. Then you had made reference to the fact that the contract you had with a government was terminated.
Yes, Council.
When was the termination effected?
We got the notification in September that the contract was going to come to an end at the end of the financial year, which was in March the following year.
Okay. So on the same
And
bundle of...
following year would be what, 2015? 2016?
It would be 2016
Yes.
Justice.
On the same bundle of documents, let's go to page 2830. Do you recognize that document?
I clearly recognize it, Council.
What is it?
It is the letter that was notifying us of the termination of the contract, Council.
And go to page 2832 of that document.
I got it.
And what is the date which appears there on at the bottom?
And the date is the 29th of September 2015, signed by Dr. Silibano.
Okay. And just above there, under that is the paragraph, the first paragraph under conclusion. And it reads, based on the above discussion as well as in compliance with the 6-month termination notice required in terms of the SLA, the management of LE is hereby given notice that the Department of Health has terminated the SLA. This notice serves to give the LE the required 6-month notice for termination with effect from 1 October 2015 to 31 March 2016. So that was a notice given.
It was.
A 6-month notice.
It was, Council.
Was this in compliance with the agreement you had with the department?
Yes, it was in agreement with the SLA that we signed,
Okay.
Council.
So, upon you having been placed in possession of this 6-month notice, what steps did you take to prepare yourself for this? Can you outline what occurred thereafter?
Yes, Council. May I be given permission to give background to it?
Yes.
This wasn't just the notification. There had been various discussions that we had held with the Department of Health. And those discussions culminated to the Department of Health commissioning a consultant to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of or cost-benefit analysis study of our Esidimeni facilities. That was commissioned to the Health Advanced Institute, if my memory serves me well. At the initiation of the commission, we met with the department, and it was agreed that we were told what the terms of reference of this study was going to be. And it was agreed that at the end of the study, we also would be privy to the study so that we give our input and also discuss the way going forward. This was based on the fact that the department felt that the services were costly.
Your services?
Our services were costly.
Yes. And how much did you charge them per day?
We charged them under 300 rand per day. That included 24 hours clinical care in the form of nursing, with caregivers also associated with that. We also provided daily medical officer to be able to examine those cases that needed a medical attention immediately. We also had a team of allied health professionals who attended to their other needs in terms of rehabilitation.
This was 300 rand per day per patient.
Per patient, Justice.
And how many patients did you house at the time?
At Gauteng, when these discussions were initiated, we still had 2,260, if my memory serves me well.
Yes. Yes. Then you said you had these discussions with the department, and they informed you that your services are costly. And then what?
Yes. Besides the clinicians, the 300 included medicines.
Oh.
It included transport for the patients when they needed to go for their follow-up visits at the nearby hospitals like Chris Baragwanath. It also included
The last time I heard it was Chris Honey.
Chris Honey Baragwanath, Justice.
Yes.
My apology.
No problem.
It also included their daily toiletries. It included clothing. It included the meals that they got, which were 3 major meals with 4 snacks in between. Our meals were moderated by a full-time dietitian for the division, so they were reviewed on a regular basis.
Yes. Then you were still busy with this background, the department telling you
Needless to say, this included accommodation.
Absolutely, Justice, that is true.
Then what occurred?
Well, the study, we never got to see the outcome of the study. We were curious to find, because we wanted also to know how we could adjust so that we could meet their concern. But we were categorically told that this was commissioned by the department, and the department was not obliged to share that information with us.
Yes. Then, how did you then start to prepare yourself for this move?
Just before we get to that question, it's an important question. Let me ask this. Did your original contract require any causa, any specified reason for the cancellation? Or was it simply a cancellation on notice? You understand the question, Doctor? There's some agreements which you may cancel only if A, B, C, D had occurred. And there are contracts which are simply on notice. You don't have to say why you want to walk away. Did your contract require specific grounds for cancellation, or was it an on-notice contract?
I might get held up there legally because I'm not quite sure. But it had time frames, and at the end of the contract, we then would sit before the contract ends, discuss and see if it is renewed or not. It also had some clauses on how the contract could be terminated if the following was not adhered to. As a result, we had quarterly review meetings with the department. That was the way of monitoring and evaluation of our adherence to the SLA. They also had one annual planned inspection or visit to the facilities, which also included unannounced visits that they could conduct.
Was the service level agreement separate from the master contract, from the main contract?
I'm only aware of the service level agreement, which I think might have been adapted through the years from the main contract, Justice.
Yeah. Do you have a copy of the service level agreement with you?
I, unfortunately, Council did not know I needed to bring it, but I can forward it to you if you need it. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Would like to have a copy of that. Then, now you've been told that in 6 months, you must prepare yourself for the move of about 2,260 patients. Were you told how was this move going to be implemented?
We were, okay, sorry, I'll request to go back. We were told to reduce by the end of March 2015 by 200, which was okay because that was, we had earlier on what they referred to as the mental health strategy for the department 2020, which indicated that they wanted to reduce the number of institutionalized mental health care users by 10% on an annual basis until 2020. So when we received this letter, we were quite surprised as to what happened to that arrangement. In fact, it started in March 2015 when we then got a letter that said by the end of April we should have reduced another 200, and we refused. We said it's not practical, and we will keep to what we know, which actually the strategy 2020 was for us an information sharing session. We never got a formal notification that it will be implemented as from what date.
That is quite quick. Let's start step by step. What is Strategy 2020?
Strategy 2020 was a mental health strategy that the Gauteng Department of Health developed in order to comply with the National Mental Health Framework Policy, which was promoting the deinstitutionalization of mental health care users so that they could be in community-based settings where appropriate.
And were you told over what period would this strategy be implemented?
The copy that was shared with us at the meeting, it would have been up to 2020. So we just are waiting for the department just to say when will be the initial date of starting this process. It just.
And whilst you're on this, let me refer you to the same document, page 2831. Under discussions.
I've got it,
Yeah.
Council.
The second sentence at the top, it says, the rehabilitation and discharge of mental health care users to either their homes or NGOs earlier than was the practice before is now an unavoidable priority for the department. Furthermore, this is in line with the new policy of mental health 2013 to 2020, which places emphasis on the care of users at community level and states the following in respect of mental health care users. The first bullet point, second bullet point, and third bullet point. That it should be provided with the least restrictive form of care. Local community-based resources should be mobilized wherever possible, and all avenues for outpatients and community-based residential care should be explored before inpatient care is undertaken. So is this the policy you're referring to?
This is this is an extract of what the policy was aiming to achieve.
Yes. Then the next paragraph under this bullet point, the third bullet point, it provides, according to Appendix 7.7, 5% of mental health care users admitted before 1 January 2003 should be discharged at the end of every year, and 15% of those admitted after 1 January 2003 should be discharged by the end of every year. Further, the mental health care users were expected to stay at the facilities of Life Esidimeni for 9 months and then be discharged.
That is true. However, Council, the department was fully aware of the patients that had extended stay. These patients were not your normal mental health patients. These patients had stayed at the state tertiary institutions for years, and a team of psychiatrists with their multidisciplinary teams had evaluated and agreed that these patients could not be integrated back into the community. As a result, they then came to Esidimeni. We did everything according to the SLA as we could to try and trial out as how many we can discharge back to the community. We had our own psychiatrists who would evaluate and advise. We would give leave of absence to these users when we feel they need to go out, we think they are dischargeable. And our social workers would go and follow up at their homes to see how they are adapting, how we could make the environment more appropriate.
Just a little bit slower.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're writing. Just a little bit slower.
Okay.
Yes.
So every patient that was held beyond the 9 years was discussed in detail at the quarterly reviews with the Department of Health officials. So it is no surprise that some of the patients ended up staying with Esidimeni for longer periods. Not that after they have been reviewed once, they would then be forgotten. They would be reviewed on a continuous basis. And when our clinicians were confident that they are ready to be integrated back to the community, then they would be released back to the community.
So you will be advised by your clinical findings whether these patients are ready to be discharged or not.
Clinical findings involving the allied health professionals who follow up the patients while they are on the trial period. Council.
And hence, there was a requirement for you to conduct your periodic reviews.
True, Council.
Thank you. Then, in your preparations for these patients, now in your discussions with the department, and what was the plan?
We requested for an immediate meeting.
Yes.
Because we felt 6 months to discharge 2,000 plus patients was not practical within the chronic psychiatric clinical practice.
Did you inform them of that?
We had several meetings where we objected. We wanted to know where these patients were going to go. We even offered that we could be part of the teams that would go out and accredit the sites where these patients would go.
That is the NGOs.
NGOs. We asked for the list of NGOs. We asked if we could be granted that permission to go and assist the teams in looking at these NGOs and see if they will be appropriate places for our users. That was declined. We even offered the fact that we could have the workers at the NGOs come into our facilities to get an experience of how to handle these users. That we were never taken up on. We said we cannot be able to discharge 50 patients a week.
Why would you not be able 50 patients a week?
50 patients a week, Justice, would be practical in a normal hospital setting. These patients needed a team of people to evaluate. That is why when the department said they will send their clinicians, we said impossible, because a once-off visit will not tell the condition of the patient.
Are you fine that we proceed, or do you need some short time to recover?
If I could just have a drink of water, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have two. I think they've given me your bottle of water. I don't know why mine are two. Doctor, while talking about discharges, could you look again at page 2831? To what does Appendix 7.7 refer? Is it appendix to the policy document, or is it appendix to your agreement?
It was appendix to the SLA.
To the
Justice.
SLA.
Yes.
And the SLA would contain these requirements of 5% of healthcare users being discharged at the time stipulated there.
True, Justice.
Now, immediately thereafter, you see the next paragraph. The HOD claims that you the above targets and outputs required by the department from LE are not always met. Some of the reasons provided by LE for its failure to meet the required targets, whether some of the users were too old and are without families. Some families are unable to manage them, while others have no families. What is your response to that accusation?
The accusation, to me, it sounds like painting a one-time picture. These patients, it's looking only at those who remained. A number of patients had gone through the facility. There was high demand in the department's hospitals for such beds, which then would replace those that have left. From the way it sounds as if we kept 2,000 patients for over 10 years or whatever the case might be, which is not true. No.
So, but what is the response? You did comply with the stipulations in the SLA?
Yes, Justice, we did. If we did not, we would have received a breach of contract.
And you tried to discharge people in the manner that was agreed on in Appendix 7.7.
True, Justice. If we did not, it would be discussed at the quarterly meetings, and we would get the go-ahead from the Department of Health.
The department says, look at the next paragraph, in order to cater for the above-mentioned concerns, the department sought to strengthen the services provided by NGOs in order for them to accommodate the users who have improved but cannot be discharged yet, as well as those without families. Therefore, LE is advised to initiate the discharge process of all the users with family as stipulated in the SLA. What did that mean in practice?
In practice, it meant that we could discharge users to NGOs that we felt were fit to go to the NGOs. We had absolutely no problem with that. However, we wanted to know where our users were going.
So there was no preset list of NGOs that you could go and check beforehand?
We requested that for that time and time again, and up till to the last day of the last patient leaving, we still did not know where they were going.
And were the discharges clinically supported? In other words, the letter says you must discharge patients. The question is, but for that instructions, would your clinicians have discharged these patients?
The multidisciplinary teams would then sit and review these patients. We reviewed them on a weekly basis to see what their progress was. And based on the clinical findings of the multidisciplinary team, they then would make a recommendation as to where this patient should go in terms of the level of care, be it rehabilitation, be it clinical care. So that would be determined by the multidisciplinary team.
Yes, Dr. Mkachwa. Perhaps let me take you back to where you had said that when you were requested to discharge or to prepare yourself to discharge these patients, you refused. Why did you refuse?
We wanted a plan. In 2007, children were taken out of our facility to an NGO. Some of them died. We did not want a repeat of that.
Which facility is that? Are you referring to?
It was I think it was called Kwezilogusa NGO in Soweto.
They were taken from which of your facilities?
From Banning to the
From
children's
Banning.
unit, yeah. Thanks. Sorry, your counsel.
How many were these children taken out of your facility then?
If my memory serves me well, I might not be quite accurate, but I think there were 16 of them. And they came back to request that we take the ones that were still surviving. They were severely dehydrated and highly under malnutrition.
So when you were approached in 2015, you had an experience of a failure of a mass removal of patients from one of your institutions.
True, counsel.
So having refused to discharge or to effect this mass discharge of psychiatric patients, what did you do then?
We were reminded that these were the patients of the Department of Health, not ours. We are a service provider contracted, and our contract has come to an end.
Yes.
Our clinicians wanted to walk out because they felt this is just not on. We begged them to stay, assess the patients, and make sure that the patients leave the facilities with records and their proper medication.
And ultimately, what did they leave with, each one of them?
Each one, when they left our facilities, they had a picture, they had their IDs, they had a discharge summary. You will understand some of these patients had stayed with us for a long period of time, so they have volumes of files. If we offered to the department, if they wanted the records, they can send their people to come and do the copying. We will provide the service and they can come and copy. We didn't have resources at the time to be able to manage this sudden discharge of patients. So we deployed everybody to focus on just making sure that the users left the units with all necessary documents. So the discharge summary would include the most relevant information that is current for the patient at the time, including also their chronic medication, including also their dates for follow-ups at the hospitals that they were supposed to go to. Yes. We then also supplied them with medication. When the numbers started going up, we realized that actually we were not stocked up pharmaceutically to manage to dispense all these. So we went back to the department and asked that the process of pharmacy procurement should be fast-tracked, not the 2 weeks that was the cycle that we had at the time. We wanted that fast-tracked so that each patient would leave the facility with their proper medication. And each and every one of them left with that in a box handed over to a DOH official.
DOH official, you're referring to Department of Health?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, Council Department of Health.
Yes. And we have received reports that some of these patients were received without IDs, medication, clothing, and so on. What do we have to say to that?
I'm not surprised. We requested for the list of NGOs and the names of the patients where they were going to go so that we could pre-pack their stuff. We were prepared to go and deliver those at the NGOs to hand them over to the rightful people, but we never got that list. As a result, we would get a list like today to discharge for tomorrow, which then made... all we did was make sure that we've packed everything for the patient and handed it over to the DOH officials because they knew where these patients were going. We had no clue. Had we had that clue, we would have prepared for particular NGOs. every patient would have gotten their stuff from that box. But now we prepared for bulk. How they manage that process, I cannot understand. It was out of my hands.
Dr. Mkacho, on page 2832, let's just take you back to your notice of termination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Selebano says, LE is urged to work with the department representatives in order to send users on leave of absence, initiate the discharge process, as well as to assist in placing some users in 163 identified NGOs who have allocated 4,952 beds and daycare placements that are subsidized by the department. Did that happen? Is that true?
I cannot, Justice, say it's not true. As it says, 163 identified, it was identified by the Department of Health. That information was never shared with us as requested. We had several meetings where there were follow-ups on these issues, and we were told the plan is coming, the plan is coming. We never got to the plan in time to be able to prepare for this.
What is sending a user on leave of absence?
Justice, it is when you trial the user to see if he will survive in the environment that you want to discharge the patient to, which actually is what we wanted, we recommended to the department to say, let's identify the NGOs so that the users can also have a chance to go and trial the places whilst they are still having a place at our facilities. And then we will assess and see if that is suitable for that user. Also, so that when they move, they are not totally thrown into a foreign, strange place that they've never been to.
You are also required, look at the same paragraph. The department required you to initiate the discharge process. Now, was that a command, or did you have an option not to discharge?
It was a command from where I'm sitting, and it wasn't something new. We have been doing this. The discharge process was ongoing. The only thing that is different is when we were discharging, we knew where our patients were. We could follow them up. In this instance, we didn't know those 163 NGOs.
Then they say they urged you to assist in placing some users in the 163 identified NGOs. Did you know what to do about that requirement? And did you do it?
We could not send users to places we didn't know about. We didn't know their names. We didn't know their locations. We didn't know who the contact person was.
Did you know anything about the bed count that is set out there? That there were existing 4,956 beds and daycare placements.
In their plan, in the plan of the department, I'm sure they had calculated that those beds were known to them, but that information was never shared with me.
And that I'm sure is the black language thing, I'm sure. You mean you are not sure.
I'm glad you are black, Justice.
Yeah, but when you say I'm sure, you mean I am not sure. You mean
I am. I do not know how the number of beds were calculated.
Yeah.
The department had that information, not us.
And lastly, in relation to that too, the evidence before us so far is that the patients were fetched from your facilities. The letter suggests that you were to cooperate in transferring or taking the patients to other placements or facilities. Why were the patients fetched by the department? Do you know?
Well, just as I would think that because they knew where they were going to take the patients to, we didn't know. Secondly, that process also, we fought at some point with the department when they sent an old open buggy to pick up our users. We refused.
Counsel.
Yeah. And this old open buggy you referred to, were you able to identify where was it coming from, or from which NGO did it come from?
When I got the call, I told the hospital manager, turn that damn thing out of our facilities. These are people.
And with this NGO, which is number of 163 identified NGO, which you had now stated that you didn't know, and that you did not know this allocated 4,952 beds and daycare placements that are subsidized by the department. And this information having not been shared with you, how were you then expected to discharge these patients?
That is the reason why we actually requested that the department officials be placed at our facilities, because they would know who would go where. All we would do would be to get the list of the users, prepare what they needed to have, hand it over to the department to administer that process.
Is it not a requirement that when you discharge a patient, you must discharge a patient to an identifiable institution or facility?
That was the practice before this came up. I cannot answer that one. The department will have to answer.
And how was it dealt with when the patients were fetched from the facility?
Well, council, we would have the list prepared, and then we would prepare those users for the department to take over. Then the bus or emergency transport would come, and they would manage that process. As soon as we handed the number for the day, we were preparing for the next day.
Yes.
So we wouldn't know what would happen and how these users were placed and what criteria was used. We did not know.
And how would these patients be paired? Did you pair them in terms of a particular group of friends, or what? You'll just pick them randomly?
The main reason we requested for the name of the NGO, the location of the NGO, and also the number of beds available in the NGO, it was for us to try and be able to group patients according to their location so that it would be easier for families to visit them. We also wanted to make sure that our users, we knew them better. They were like family to us. So we knew them better. We knew who is friends with who. And we would like to have that kind of a setting where they wouldn't be totally strangers in a totally strange place.
Yesterday, Ms. Nube came here, who was the founder and the executive director of Precious Angels. She testified that she came to your hospital and she picked patients that she wanted to have. and they tried to give her female care users, and she refused. And she said she wanted only males. And she was given males. What do you say to that?
This was another area where we fought with the department, because one morning I got a call that there is several NGOs at the facility. And I said, on what grounds? And they said they are coming to choose their patients. I said, I'm sorry, this is not an auction. You get them the hell out of that office. I want identification. I want to know on what grounds are they coming to this facility. And I phoned the department, I phoned the director to say, this is unacceptable. I will not have it happen in our facilities, and these are not auctioned. They are people who must be treated with such dignity.
Tell me the specific people you talked to at the department.
Most commonly, I would talk to Dr. Manamela because she was the director of the program.
So NGOs would come and literally pick and choose the patients that they would rather have. Because she, for instance, told us that she was not prepared to take any patients that did not have forms of mobility, who could either not walk themselves or who did not have wheelchairs. And she insisted that she must be given wheelchairs. And your hospitals, your facilities gave her wheelchairs in order to help the patients. But she was the one who made the selection, the choosing, the picking.
Just as it might have happened on that day I'm talking about before I was notified. After I got that and spoken to Dr. Manamela, I then issued an instruction to all our facilities that that would not happen in the facilities. About giving the chairs, it is normal process or procedure for us to make sure that those who, when we discharge our users, we discharge them with the appropriate devices. Thanks, Justice.
Yes. Dr. Mkachwa, there has been evidence by a social worker called Daphne Ndlovu that in May 2016, they arrived on a 27-seater bus and with an instruction to pick only 10 patients. But out of the command of Dr. Manamela, they ended up leaving with 26 patients.
I would not be privy to the details of that council, but as I indicated, we were given the list that needed to go there on a particular day, and we prepared that list. As to how that list got taken and transported, we were out of the picture. We never knew what happened.
And the main reason she advanced forth was that the intention of taking 10 patients was to allow these 10 patients to adjust at their institution before they take more. What do you have to say with that?
I would outrightly refute it. To adjust, you would have given the patient a leave of absence to go and trial the place before you take them there permanently. What adjustment when you take them there permanently? That beats me.
Yeah. And in these proposals you had referred to, that you had proposed to accredit, to assist them to accredit the NGOs, their premises, as well as offering your premises to train them. What other possible solutions did you provide to the department?
I will remember vividly after a meeting at Randfontein with the families, where they put their foot down and said, this is not a consultation. You're coming here to tick a box. Stop this nonsense and start the consultation process and do it correctly and appropriately.
And there was a meeting where Mr. Musinogi was present, right? In Randfontein?
In Randfontein, yes, he was present together with the HOD. However, the family was expecting the MEC to be present at that meeting. Yes. She didn't come.
And he reports in his evidence that the meeting was tumultuous. In other words, the people were very unhappy, and the families, in other words, of users, and pushed back as much as they could. Is that the meeting?
That is true, Justice.
And you were present in the meeting?
I was present in the meeting, and when I was asked to say my piece, I said to the parents, Life Esidimeni is prepared to renegotiate this with the department. That was my offer to the department.
When you put forth all these proposals, which you now indicate that they were all rejected, to whom did you communicate these proposals?
Council, just to fill up on that one, I didn't answer your question. The proposal that I then presented to Dr. Silibano was, why don't you just take over our facilities, buy us out, so that there is continuity of care? And he asked me to go back and put together a proposal. I did go put together and evaluated the facilities and sent him the information, which had three options. That would be a cash payment, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. We never heard from the department.
Any proposal to house the identified NGOs whose identity were not shared with you? Did you make that proposal as well?
We wouldn't go to NGOs and say we can house you, because that would simply mean we would have to maintain the facility and the NGOs would just come and use the facility. We wanted to be able to know when we hand over the facility, either we are out or we are running the facility.
Thank you. Anything else that you may have?
Yeah, it's a sad. It was sad for me to see how clinicians could succumb to what I can call political pressure. In one meeting, I was so angry that afterwards they said, it can't be that bad. I said, it's bad when we forget the oath we took.
By the clinicians, who are you referring to? The department's clinicians?
I'm referring to the head of department, who is the operational person. I'm referring to the officials in the directorate of the mental health section, who all have wonderful credentials as clinicians. How could they not stand up and say, over my dead body, I will not do such?
And you had mentioned to the fact that you refused to, or you somehow said that it was not practical to implement this process or project within the 6-month period that you were given. What in your view is a reasonable time period?
At the time, I realized that this was a very urgent process that needed to be completed. I consulted with my team and said, okay, we can't do it in 6 months. Can we pressure it in for 12 months? I wrote a letter to request for an extension until September 2016 so that we could have the 12 months to manage this process appropriately. That was declined.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like you to look at page 2798.
Thank you, Justice.
Look at the vision of this project plan. Let's start off with the purpose. Look at 3.1. To deinstitutionalize the mental health care users from restrictive environment and thereby reducing departmental costs and non-complying to financial prescripts and the Auditor General requirements. What do you understand that to mean? Is one of your clinician colleagues who wrote this?
My interpretation of that paragraph was to make sure that mental health care services are deinstitutionalized. We all subscribe to that. From a restrictive environment, I think my understanding is they felt that our facilities were restrictive. However, that is relative because we had users who would go and work and come back to the facility. We had users going out on excursions. So restrictive, for me, not so sure what it meant. Also, some of the users, you would find that in a environment that is not controlled, they would get lost. They would just walk and walk. And I know at one place, one of the users was found at a border somewhere, so they had to return that person. So I think it would have been appropriate to, we were subscribing to deinstitutionalizing at the appropriate level of care.
Yeah, but let's look at the main clause there. Then it goes, and thereby, they'll do all those things, and thereby reduce departmental costs, and I suppose it means reduce non-complying, whatever that means, to financial prescripts and Auditor General requirement.
I would I assume, Justice, that the reference to the Auditor General requirement would be around the contract. The truth of the matter is, Esidimeni, over the umpteen years of experience in looking after mentally ill patients, had developed the skill, the competence, and the know-how how to deliver that service at a very cost-effective level compared to what this would have cost the Department of Health. I therefore feel it should have been either the Department of Health would have come up with a plan, development plan, to develop their own capacity to develop the kind of competence that was there at Esidimeni. They have gone out on tenders in the Gauteng department, and we never got the results of that. Just to me, that illustrates the fact that Esidimeni had refined their processes to the level that is totally minimally possible to provide quality healthcare service for the mental health care users at that level. So then cost and non-compliance I wouldn't understand. For me, the deinstitutionalization of mental health care users means that whilst you deinstitutionalize them, the money or the resources that you had for those users at the institution would follow them into these community-based places.
Did you know about the Auditor General having required that costs for mental health care be reduced?
I was not privy to that information, Justice.
Let's look at the vision. Look at that. The vision, that was supposed to be the purpose. The vision is to deinstitutionalize all. The word all is used. Of chronic mental health care users currently admitted in Life Esidimeni. And then ensuring provision of quality community mental health care services in the PHC. What is PHC?
Primary health care.
Primary health care and community-based care services in Gauteng province. So the plan was to remove all of your patients. Was that feasible? Was that and clinically desirable?
Clinically, we will know that there will always be a percentage of mental health care users that will not be able to thrive in the normal communities that we have. So that they all, for me, would need to be qualified to really understand how that was going to be planned for and how are we going to cater for them, because if we just released everybody, that for me would be, it's not practical.
Look at goals again to deinstitutionalize all users who are currently at Life Esidimeni. Could one take every single category of users you have and without more place them with NGOs? That is what 3.4 tells us. That is the goal.
Justice, I would still maintain my stance. Clinically impossible. Some of these users had inflicted immense traumatic experience for families who cannot be able to take them back. The living conditions of some of the users, as we visited them, they didn't have a place to sleep. How can I, as a parent, be comfortable in my other room and leave my children with a mentally ill relative of mine? How many of us can be able to do that? How many of us have got the resources to pay somebody to look after these patients when they are going to work so that they can feed that patient? It's all those questions that come to mind to say, are we realistic? What kind of a community do we have in Gauteng? We are not in some rural village somewhere where the community still looks after our people. We are in Gauteng, and everybody does not have that support system. How do we discharge? I don't know.
Council?
Thank you, Justice Masaneki. Good afternoon, Dr. Mkhatshwa.
Good afternoon, Council.
Dr. Mkhatshwa, you say that a report was commissioned by the department to do a cost-benefit analysis
True,
of the
Council.
services that were being provided at Life Esidimeni.
True, Council.
And you say it was a report that was prepared by a consultancy called HA, Health Advanced Initiative.
If my memory serves me well, I think I can recall that it was HAI, yes, Council.
You said that you were curious to find out the results of the study and that you requested it but were refused the report. Is that correct?
That is correct, Council.
Did you ever, at any later point, then receive the HAI report?
I never received it,
So you have never seen it?
I've never seen it. I have no idea what its contents are. Thanks, Council.
Did the department tell you why it deemed your charges to be excessive then?
We asked, we wanted to know. We would have these discussions on an annual basis because our contract required an annual reassessment of the tariff. We would bring statistics to the department and be able to debate with them to say this is what it costs. Relevant, I mean, we would use the normal figures that are available to the public to try and adjust our costs accordingly. And they knew what was influencing our costs. They knew our cost drivers, and I don't know. I don't have the answer, Council.
At the quarterly review meetings, was it ever raised that the problem of costs?
They raised it and indicated that they were going to start on reducing the number of patients, and they would instruct us on an annual basis as to how many they wanted reduced.
You also said that you requested the list of the NGOs, their names and their addresses, and that you were informed that there were many NGOs, but that you were never provided that information, the names and the addresses.
I never got to that information, Council.
But we've also heard that NGOs arrived, representatives of NGOs arrived at the facility, at the Life Esidimeni facilities, to collect users. How would the staff at the facilities know whether the people know whether this was a legitimate process? How would they know whether the person who declares themselves to be coming from an NGO is in fact an NGO that has been contracted by the department?
Life Esidimeni would not know. However, that's the reason that propelled us to demand that department officials be placed at our facilities to manage that process, because they had that information.
So was there a department official at the facility in order to manage that process?
True, Council.
You're saying that process was not under your control?
Not under our control. We would just prepare the pack for the numbers that we have been given and hand it over to the department.
You also spoke about the discharge, the items that accompanied the patients upon discharge, including a discharge summary, information about chronic medication, dates for follow-up, medical appointments. The department has alleged that you withheld medical records, and that the reason you withheld medical records is because you were not paid by the department. Is that correct?
That is absolutely not true. We never held any medical records. Like I indicated earlier, all we said was it will be impossible for us, given the time frames that have been given to us, to make the full medical record of the patient. However, the patient would leave with a discharge summary which summarized the current status of the patient. If the department wanted copies of the full medical record, they were more than welcome to come to our facility and make copies.
Did any of the department officials request the medical records from you?
They said we should, yes, in a meeting they raised the issue of medical records, and we indicated to them that this is what is going to happen. There will be a discharge summary. If you want the full document you will have to come and do it yourself. We don't have the resources for that.
Did they then come to the facility to collect the medical records?
I have no record of that in my department.
Are the medical records of the patients who were transferred still with Life Esidimeni then?
The originals.
Yeah.
Yes, the originals are with us.
So for those patients who did have receive medical records, those would have been copies.
There will be no patient that left Esidimeni without a discharge summary. There is no patient that left Esidimeni with their full medical record.
Is it normal when a patient is discharged from a health facility to hand them their full medical record?
We are held liable by the Mental Health Act to keep the originals. However, we can make copies and certify them and give them to whoever follows the proper procedure.
Thanks.
And you offered that they may make copies, and they never came to make copies.
But I do not recall any of my managers reporting that they came, Justice.
When you supplied, as part of the discharge, when you provided a supply of chronic medication, for how many weeks would that chronic medication last?
If we are told the patient is going to a hospital setting, we supply 7 days medical supply. If they are going out to an NGO, we supply for 28 days.
28 days.
Just to also add to that, Council, we did inquire about the capability of the primary health care centers in supplying this kind of medication, and we were assured that the pharmaceutical division of the department is up and running, and there would be no challenges in that area. We also inquired about the staffing levels at the NGOs, given the clinical competence that they were under. How will that be monitored? And we were assured that the users would leave Esidimeni for a equal or better service.
You said that...
And is it Dr. Manamela who gave these assurances?
Even the MEC herself did. It's public knowledge. In the media, she came out and said it.
Dr. Mkhatshwa, you said that you had most of your conversations were with Dr. Manamela. And you said that when this proposal was made about NGOs arriving to select patients, that you said in no uncertain terms this is not an auction, that you said this to Dr. Manamela. How did she respond to you?
She apologized, and that's how we got them out. I said, I will not allow anybody to come to our facilities without proper identification, without proper documentation that entitles them to whatever they are coming for in the facility.
I now need to take you to the record. If in your bundles, in volume 2, if you could pull out volume 2, or if someone could assist you to pull out volume 2. If you can turn to page 643, please. Do you see it?
Thanks, Councillor, I forgot it.
This is a document that's entitled Minutes of Meeting 9 February 2016. And it lists the people who are present at this meeting. Do you see that?
Yes, Council.
And amongst the people present is yourself.
True, Council.
What was the purpose of this meeting?
The purpose of the meeting was to get clarity on the plan that the department had. It involved, as you can see, Council, it involved all departments. You also see HR, because we also were concerned about how our employees were going to be accommodated in the process. So it was an overall evaluation of where the process was and what the way forward was going to be.
If you can turn over the page, under...
I'm sorry, Council, is it 643?
Yeah, yes.
I can see from Life Esidimeni,
It says
Paul and David
Morgan.
and Morgan.
Yes, Justice.
Morgan is you?
Yes, Justice.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sure, thanks. That helps. Thank you.
So on page 644, item...
No, but because they all refer themselves with titles.
To their first name.
And everybody from Life Esidimeni is referred to in first names.
It's an indication of where the relationship had deteriorated.
Page 644, item 4, the subject of which is patient profile. If you can have regard to subparagraph C, it says the following: life noted. I take it that life in this context means Life Esidimeni.
True, Council.
And that would be, and you were representing Life Esidimeni. So this is now you speaking. It says, life noted that the number of patients that appear from Dr. Manamela's presentation to have been discharged in January far exceeds the average monthly discharges from its facilities in the preceding months. What does that mean?
That refers to the record of patients that have been discharged in the facilities. What this just was showing to the department that we want to cooperate with them in discharging the patients. And you would find that in the pattern of discharges in the facilities, there would be those outliers where you discharge more patients because there were more dischargeable patients that month. So that is referring to such a case.
But this is referring to minutes of the meeting of 9 February 2016. So by then, you're saying there had already been a number of discharges?
Yes, Council.
And then it says in paragraph, on the next page, 645, paragraph E, Life undertook to provide a summary of the number of patients discharged for each month over the last 6 months. Is that just the normal discharge process that takes place at Life Esidimeni, or is this part of the marathon project?
This would have, when was the date of the meeting?
9 February
9
2016.
February 2016. So it was part of the project.
I don't understand that answer. I thought you had obligations to discharge at a certain rate under the service level agreement. And the province's complaint was that you were not discharging at a rate commensurate to what Annexure 7.7 required of you?
Justice, it would,
There is, besides the project that was to become the marathon project, you had a duty to discharge at a certain rate, as stipulated in the service level agreement. Or did I misunderstand that evidence?
Justice, it was part of the project. However, the families through Section 27 and SADC went and put this in a court of law, and it was halted for the period, I think December period, until somewhere in January when it was overruled. So this would have been that marathon project was put on brakes for that period whilst there was the legal battle.
And notice to terminate had already been given.
The notice had been given, Justice.
Thanks. You may proceed, Counsel.
This meeting, just to clarify, wasn't a quarterly review meeting, the normal meetings you have with the department.
True.
Is that correct?
That is true. We would only be having department officials and ourselves for that review meeting, Counsel.
So we were on page 645. It says at paragraph F, life, and then in brackets it says Paul. Is Paul a representative of Life Esidimeni?
Paul was one of our hospital managers.
Okay.
Counsel.
Life stated that the data from Dr. Manamela's report that around 90% of patients at Waverley were dependent and 10% were independent was not accurate. In fact, much less than 10% of the patients at Waverley were independent. He noted further that this does not accord with the department's report that approximately a third of current residents are independent. Can you comment on that?
I can. It goes back to what I said earlier. Mental health patients, you cannot just come and see them in one consultation and then you say they are okay or not. So this is what the department did, came and did their visit of the facilities, saw people greeting and hi, how are you, Morgan, or whatever the case might be, and they thought this one is ready for discharge.
If you turn over the page to page 646, paragraph B. A question was put to you earlier by Justice Maseneke about the number of beds that were available in the NGOs and in the communities, 4,500 and something. This relates to that question. At paragraph B, it's stated, Life mentioned that the MEC mentioned at the family meetings last week that there were 130 NGOs who are primed for Life Esidimeni patients. However, that list has not been provided to the families. It goes on to say, Life representatives and Dr. Talatala advised that there are no beds available for them to discharge users to, and noted that they are therefore surprised to hear that so many beds are available in NGOs. Let me pause there. First of all, were the NGOs primed, in your view, at this point in time? Were they primed to receive Life Esidimeni patients? That's the language that's used in the minutes.
I have no idea. I know that the department held meetings with NGOs. I have no idea of what transpired in those meetings.
And what did it mean, in paragraph C? Why were you surprised to hear that there were beds available?
Because we were busy pressuring the department, asking for the list, and they would just not come forth with the list.
Prior to this project, were you aware of the number of NGOs available in Gauteng to which you could discharge patients?
Most of our users would discharge back to their families when we discharged. None of the NGOs that we visited in the area just to check were really geared up to cater for our users.
Thank you. If we could turn now to page 661. Do you see it?
Thanks, Councillor, I got it.
This reflects an email from you to a Ms. Cassie Chambers on the 2nd of March 2016. Is that right?
That is correct, Councillor.
What is the content of this email?
This was just a summary of the Gauteng discharges for that period. And that is what it is about.
August 2015 to January 2016.
Correct, Council.
In your opinion, was this the normal rate of discharge from Life Esidimeni to?
This is what we could say clinically approved discharges.
These were clinically approved discharges. So this was not transfer of patients from.
No, it wasn't.
From one facility to another to make space or as part of the project? Or?
No,
No,
it wasn't that.
Thank you. That's all with volume 2, but with volume 3, please. If we could
Just
pull out
before
volume 3.
you move away from page 661, were there any transfers from Baneng? I see during the period appearing on page 661, there were none. But why weren't there any, not transfers, discharges, sorry?
Justice Baneng is a very special institution. It caters for children with severe mental disability. That is the reason.
Well, Mr. Musinogi says Baneng was part of the target for the discharges, seen from the province's point of view. But he says he was the hero of that show. He intervened and the discharges were stopped. What do you know about that? Did the province intend to discharge these children from Baneng?
I know that Justice, they wanted to, but we pleaded and said, we actually said, go to Baneng, see for yourself, and tell us where we discharge these people to.
And ultimately, the children were not moved.
Then, yes, Justice, then Baneng was sort of a special project. Hence, we got 2 letters of determination, where the one was for the 4 general ones, and then Baneng, they said they are prepared to negotiate with us.
Council?
Thank you, Justice. Page 1011 is in volume 3.
I've got it, Council.
Thanks. That page reflects, again, an email from you to Ms. Cassie Chambers. Is that correct?
That's correct, Council.
And it's dated 2nd March 2016. And it's in response to an email from Ms. Chambers to you, in which she says, amongst other things, I don't know if you have had much luck with feedback from the Department of Health with regards to the figures they keep using. I am concerned that their numbers keep changing and fluctuating. And from what you have given me, there shouldn't be such a dramatic difference. Do you perhaps know why they have such different numbers? Your response is, I think that they doctor the figures to support their cause. What did you mean? What figures were these?
These were the figures of the discharges of the mental health care users. As previously discussed, our data and their data did not reconcile. However, we supply monthly statistics report to the department as part of our obligation. So the question I had was, if we supply the figures on a monthly basis, why would the figures then differ if they are not tampered with?
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor.
Can you turn to page 101 form? Sorry, I'm not done yet. You were hoping that that was my last question. I can see it. 1014, but we're almost there. 1014. Again, email correspondence. Is that correct? This is addressed to an email from Ms. Chambers addressed to you. Are you the Morgan in this email?
Correct, Council.
And somebody named Malik.
Hospital manager, Randfontein.
And the inquiry in this email is for you to assist her to understand the distinction between discharges and placements. Is that correct?
Correct, Council.
Were you able to provide that explanation?
I think I did. I think I did indicate that placement would mean you taking the user from Esidimeni to the facility that the department had identified. A discharge would be a clinically approved by our clinical team to say this patient is ready to be discharged home. Thanks.
So a discharge would mean the patient is no longer required to be cared for as an inpatient.
As an inpatient in the facility, yes, Council.
On page 1015, so your response is not...
I'm sorry again, Council, to interrupt. The last sentence of the first paragraph, what does that mean? The clinical team of Life Esidimeni.
That would mean the multidisciplinary team of that is at the Life Esidimeni facilities are responsible to identify the patients who qualify for the normal discharge.
Would the obvious be also true? They are therefore not responsible for placements.
They would only discharge, not for placement, Justice.
Yeah. So if the province wanted anybody placed, i.e. moved from your facility to another, they'll have to tend to that process themselves.
We would ask our clinical team to assess the patient and give them a summary of what the current status of the patient is, Justice.
But you would not discharge for purposes of placement?
We would, if they leave our facility, then we would say we're discharging them from the Esidimeni facility just to indicate that they have left Esidimeni facility and gone elsewhere. But in our normal Esidimeni process, discharge would mean discharged back to community.
Council?
I understand. Thank you. page 1017 is a letter addressed to you and to two others. You see it?
I can see it.
It's a letter from South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and it's dated 10 March 2016.
Got it, Council.
And the content of the letter is, in relevant part, the following. It has come to our attention that the Gauteng Department of Health arrived today to Life Esidimeni Randfontein and instructed that 50 residents be earmarked to be discharged, and in brackets, or transferred to the Takalani Home for the Mentally Disabled. This is to happen urgently in the following day or days. It is our understanding that the department instructed earmarked residents should be those without families. Be those without families is how it reads. It has also come to our attention that a number of NGOs have today visited Life Esidimeni Randfontein and reported that they hold instructions from the DG to select residents to be discharged from Life Esidimeni to their NGOs. In relation to the first paragraph, is it correct that 50 residents of Life Esidimeni were to be discharged and to the Takalani Home? And would discharge be the correct word in that context?
Council, discharge would be inappropriate. It would be a placement.
And is it correct that 50 residents were to be placed at Takalani Home then?
The numbers, I would have to refer to my records to confirm the numbers, but the numbers were supplied by the Department of Health officials to the facilities. As indicated earlier, where those users were going, we had no clue.
And the second paragraph, that it's come to our attention that a number of NGOs have visited Life Esidimeni Randfontein with instructions from the DG to select residents. What is your response to that? Do you understand from this letter who is the DG?
Yes, I do understand, Council. And as earlier expressed, we stopped that kind of a process because we believed a clinical process needed to be followed.
Well, the DG is who? Dr. Silibano?
It would be Dr. Silibano, that would be the HOD of the Department of Health.
Thank you. If you turn to page 1018, there you respond to the letter that we were just reading. So you respond on 11 March 2016 to the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. You confirm patients were identified to be moved to Takalani. Is that correct?
That is correct, Council.
And you say they will be taken in groups of 10. Is that correct?
That's correct, Council.
Were they taken in groups of 10?
I would have to refer to the records. I don't have them handy.
And then you go on to say the following NGOs have claimed to have been sent by the Department of Health to inquire about our patients. And you name 4 NGOs. Are those the only NGOs who had approached you at that point in time?
Those were the names of because I asked the hospital managers to give me the names of the NGOs that showed up at Randfontein, and those were the
names they provided to you. Yes. Why do you say the following NGOs have claimed to have been sent?
Because they had no proper identification, they had no letter of authority from the Department of Health. And thirdly, there are no clinicians to be able to assess our users and say, I will have this one, not this one.
Dr. Mukachwa, has the department entered into a new agreement with Life Esidimeni? since after having first terminated it?
Would be not the appropriate person to ask because I have left life in July.
So you're not aware if there's a new contract that has been concluded?
I've just seen it like anybody else in the media, and I haven't really confirmed with the officials.
You say you're no longer in the employ of Life Esidimeni.
True, Council.
Why is that?
This was a very traumatic experience for me. I wouldn't see it another day.
So you resigned? This, as you say, was a very traumatic process. And
well, the answer won't get onto the record, Doctor.
Yes, I have resigned, Council.
Yes,
thank
you have to say so, yes.
Thanks,
Thank
Justice.
you.
My apology.
you say it was a traumatic process. It seems to, and it has seemed to many of us sitting through this hearing, that it's impossible to fathom why this was necessary. In your view, who was responsible? Who is giving the instructions? And why do you think that person was giving these instructions?
I only can talk about what my experience was with the interactions with the department being the HOD, the Mental Health Directorate. We also had a meeting with the MEC where she told us that she's cancelling the contract. And from the officials, I heard that
HOD, we're talking about Dr.
Dr. Silibano, yes.
And mental health care unit, you're talking about Dr. Manamela.
Dr. Manamela as the head.
And the MEC, we're talking about
Ms.
Qedani
Mahlangu, yes, Justice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So she told us she doesn't have the budget for us, for the service.
This case would be the MEC.
It would be the MEC. The MEC told us that she doesn't have the budget and she wanted to get out of the contract. Latest 2017, end of March 2017. We therefore were surprised to get that this had to be hurried over and had to be terminated in 2016.
Do you know why it needed to be done in such a hurry?
I cannot, it eludes my thinking and my reasoning because it was beyond any rational clinically. It wasn't rational business-wise. From where I'm standing, I might be wrong, but I was never proven because I never got a chance to see what an independent person would say about the costs associated with the business.
And in your view, the costs that were associated with your services were reasonable?
I would ask the house here, who can live on 200 rand per day, 300 rand per day, for your medicines, for your grooming, for a place to sleep, for food, for transport? Personally, impractical for me.
Thank you, Dr. Mkachwa.
Thanks, Council.
Thanks, Council. We know from the report of the Ombud that each of the other state institutions, like Sterkfontein and Westkoppies, keep and look after care users at 3 to 4 times the daily rate that Life Esidimeni charged. And the Ombud sets out the numbers. Is there anything you want to say about that?
It is very true. We did our benchmark. However, what we realized was the costings from the side of the Department of Health is not a true reflection of the cost, because some functions are carried by another department, which does not reflect on the Department of Health. So as much as they could appear as being 4 times higher there, they might be much higher if the true costings of the service were reflected.
So why would your company be this hurried target for budget savings? If the state should surely know what it spends on its own facilities run by the state, and you're a facility with patients of the state managed and owned privately, they surely should know that your daily costs per patient are a mere third, in some instances a quarter, of what they have to pay for state-owned and managed institutions.
I have no answer, Justice, to that, except I think Gauteng wanted to be the trailblazer in deinstitutionalization of mental health care in the country. That's all I can think about.
Could you find out what the agency was about? You said originally the time frame at one time was 2020, at another you were told by 2017, and suddenly the timeline was much nearer. It was June 2016. What was the agency? Did you ever come to find out?
Unfortunately, no, Justice. I think the MEC would be the rightful person to answer that question.
I'm inviting you to speculate, an informed speculation.
That's putting me on a wild chase. I don't know. I don't know. Is it?
There's a contract over 3 decades long, which gets terminated with a 6 months notice. We know on the evidence it was extended, isn't it, for 3 months because the province was not ready again, and they came back to you.
True.
To have it extended.
True, Justice.
And I'm trying to understand what was the compelling consideration to sacrifice all sound clinical advice and to prepare a hurried placement that we now know with hindsight led to multiple deaths. We know now, on this current count, 141. You must surely have sat down and said, what was this all about?
We warned the department of the potential catastrophe that this haphazard process was going to result in. I personally wrote to the head of department to say I am worried about these following things. Amongst them, it was the clinical care that the users were going to get and the rest.
Where is that letter now?
I probably could look for it in my files. But yes, I did.
Would you try and find it and give it to Advocate Nguchana?
I will try.
Okay.
Thanks, Justice.
And you warned that?
I warned that, number one, these users are used to this familiar environment. Immediate transfer has psychological impact on these users. They need to adjust. Some of them, that's the only family they knew their life. It was us. We queried the issue around the primary healthcare centers in terms of what has changed, because our experience is that our primary healthcare centers are not yet jacked up to the level to be able to accommodate the mental health care users. So we questioned that. We questioned what the implications would be for the families who have these loved ones, who have either one of the spouses would have to step down from work to look after the loved one if they are brought back to their homes. In one meeting, I got a shock of my life when the MEC said, when she grew up, she slept under the stove. So can these users. She cited Brazil as an example, to say in Brazil there are no mental institutions. When asked as to what happens when they got aggressive, the response was, then they are put in chains. And we said, is that it's the vision of the Gauteng Department of Health for these mental health care users?
And lastly, why or how do you think the people who died after they'd left your institution died? What are the likely or probable causes of death?
I can only speak from experience. The 2007 experience showed us that the users we have in the facilities, one, their portion of meals are managed by a qualified dietitian. My question would be, at the NGO, did they have a visiting dietitian to look at how the meals were prepared? These patients, as they are being moved from Esidimeni to wherever they were going, they are bound to be psychologically influenced and psychologically impacted in the way that some of them would go into depression. My question is, was there a care worker to feed those people? Or food would be put down and nobody cared who fed them? I'm wondering, we checked, some of our users had comorbidities. I mean, varying from anything from HIV to your hypertension and diabetes. The question is, was there somebody checking their blood pressure, their blood sugar? I don't know. Did they take their medications? I don't know.
Counsel?
Thank you, Justice Musaneke. Dr. Mkwachwa, I'm very sorry to have to ask you more questions and prolong your stay there in the box. I'm acting for the survivors in this project, and I just most of the questions that I wanted to ask has been asked, so I will try not to repeat any questions. Could I just ask from you, if you want to answer this and it's not strictly relevant, are you working at the moment?
I am working, Council.
Would you be prepared to tell us where?
I work for the private healthcare hospital industry.
And the effect that this had on you, we could see it in the box, but could you just tell us how you feel about this?
I just feel Why couldn't we have learned from the 2007 incident? Was it because we just chose to be oblivious to it, or did we choose to just ignore it totally? Why is it that when advice was put forward to say, can we not manage this better in this particular pattern, that was rejected?
Expert advice given.
Expert advice. And when in these meetings with the Society for Depression and Anxiety group, with the department, specifically SASOP, who actually gave their opinion on how they felt about this, were excluded from further meetings. They would only come and attend by invitation. So it's all those things that ask me. I ask myself, is there anything better that I could have done? I can't find the answer. I think the families actually did better than we did in that they went and toyed outside the Department of Health. Did the country notice? Can somebody then stand up and say, I never knew? It was all in the media. That was the best escalation that the families did. They stood up their ground in these meetings. They demanded apology. I remember in one meeting where the MEC arrived late and wanted to go on with her speech, and they demanded the apology. They demanded to know where their loved ones were. It was unfortunate that we could not supply that information because we were their contact point, but we never had that information. So I just felt it just depressed me. It just, when I hear 141, I go like, oh gosh. Yes. Each death at Esidimeni was thoroughly investigated. If it meant we questioned anything, we would take that body for a post-mortem.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. Doctor, I want to talk to you a little bit about the loss that this marathon project brought to our country. And I'm not minimizing the deaths now. That's why we are here. But in what other way did we lose through this project? Could I ask you about the jobs firstly? Did we lose jobs?
That was negotiated by the union with the department, and some of the employees got placed. However, you were placed where there was a place which could be far away from your place of residence. So as a result, yes, some retrenchments became a reality.
Could you put a number to that?
Can I refer to the records, and then I can be able to send that through?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Musinogi talked about 270 clinicians and other nursing staff who were retrenched. Does it help or jog your memory?
It could be true. We should also not forget the fact that some of the services we outsource. So there is outsourced services. You talk laundry, you're talking your security, you're talking catering, you're talking cleaning. All those people had no place to go to because the department could only take the clinical people.
Would you agree with me, Doctor, that those people that weren't placed were probably the poorest of the poor people?
It goes without saying. They had employment closer to where they stayed, and that was the employment, and some of them had no qualification at all. Even grade 12, some of them didn't have, but were accommodated.
Yes. And Doctor, I'm not sure whether I understood it right, but some of your hospitals were training hospitals, or some of the places, were they not?
The hospital had a college, the company has a college. As part of the training in the college, then people would come to certain various facilities for site visits and clinical experience and exposure. So yes, we did accommodate students. Also, even from the Department of Health, we did accommodate some of their students.
And was that lost when all the contracts were terminated?
It was lost. Where will they find the institutions to do that? They had to be. I think those that belong to the department are at a better position because they are mental health institutions within the department. But those that were private probably had to either drop out or find a different route.
Doctor, I was involved in the Life Esidimeni Frail Care Port Elizabeth closures as well, or intended closures, and I'll speak to you about that in a moment. But the effect on staff, knowing that they'll probably be terminated, what was that?
It was very, very traumatic for the staff. We had to call in outside service providers to be able to provide the kind of motivation to be able to go through the process and be able to conclude it.
So would you say that as a result of this, there need to be, you already said there need to be extra motivation, but moving the patients away also affected the survivors' treatment? Would you agree with that?
I fully agree with that. They needed proper care, counsel. If there was no continuity of care, definitely it has affected the survivors.
Justice Moseneke has asked you to speculate about what happened. Now, I just want to draw some parallels. In the Eastern...
In the hope that it will be informed speculation.
I hope so. Similarly to this, in the Eastern Cape, cost was also put forward as a reason for termination. Similar to what you've told the court now, there was some juggling between the departments as to who paid what, so in the one's books things would look better than the other one. Thankfully, we stopped those closures. But why do you think was Life Esidimeni targeted in this way? In Gauteng, it was the Department of Health. In Eastern Cape, it was the Department of Social Development. Could you give any explanation for that?
In the Eastern Cape, the Department of Social Development felt some of the users were falling under the health department, so the health department had to pay for that. My question was, it comes from the same coffer. It's just that it's distributed in different centers. The patients needed the service. The communities needed the service. Let's provide the service and manage these differences behind the scenes. But I left it, it wasn't resolved.
Doctor, that's the voice of reason. I would want to know why were the contracts, why was Life Esidimeni targeted in all of this? Do you have any informed theory about that?
The theory I have is that there was a question about why is it has it been such a long-term contract? I would think probably why has it, I don't know, how is it, unfortunately it's a subdivision of a listed company that does not have the appropriate BEE credentials. I don't know if that came into play. I don't know, that's just thinking out loud.
Are you saying there might have been a perception about Life Esidimeni?
It's highly possible, Counsel.
Thank you. I'm going to just move on. If you can assist us, in your centers, how would you say, how many staff did you employ per mental health care user? Just more or less. For each patient, what would the staff equivalent be?
It varied on the acuity of the patient. We'll take, for instance, if you look at the Randfontein one, where we had frail care, there you would have the ratio of the enrolled nurse to an RN a little higher because it's more of frail care support. But in the mental health side of things, it would depend on which ward they were in. If the need was there, then we would staff it appropriately. But if those that were more on the lesser acuity side, we will staff with a supervisor, and more of the lower categories, be it your enrolled nurse, your enrolled nurse auxiliary, or your care worker.
And just as, I know it's a very difficult question, if you can't answer it, then I understand it, but what would you say would the ratio be per patient, on average?
I would have to refer to
No, I'm not gonna push you for
records.
that.
Yes, thanks, Council.
If I can just speak about the handover now. When you hand over a patient, and I'm not talking about discharge now, should there not be a clinician to take over, to receive your handover?
They should be. As indicated earlier on, Council, the officials of the department were clinicians, either doctors or nurses. So when we handed over our patients, we handed them over to clinicians.
And if they were to hand over to an NGO, should they not have handed over to a clinician?
The normal process would be, yes, they should hand over to a clinician. In this instance, I don't know who they handed over to.
But as a clinician, you should know that.
It would make sense to hand over to a professional nurse, at least.
Yes. Now, if I could just speak about the handing over of the medicine, you said at least 28 days. That's probably 1 month of medication were given.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Council.
So if somebody were to testify here that 28 weeks of medicine was handed over, would that be correct?
It would be incorrect.
You wouldn't have 4 months worth of medication for any client or any healthcare user. Do you agree with me?
Absolutely no.
Could I just place this in some sort of a better box? Do you agree with me that we have a primary healthcare system, and then we've got a regional healthcare system and a tertiary healthcare system? Do you agree with me?
True, Council.
Would you also agree with me that the medicine that your healthcare users would use, and I'm not talking about schedules, would be levels that won't be available at your primary healthcare clinics?
As earlier...
You spoke about it.
I
just want to make it clear that we understand it completely.
Some of the medications would be available, like your chronic medication, your hypertension and diabetes, it would be available. But some of the high schedule psychiatric drugs, they wouldn't be available.
Yes, we have the medical, I think they call it a formulary.
True.
And in terms of that medicine, not only in schedules, but they also divide it in levels.
True, Council.
And you would have levels from 2 to 5, which is the higher levels, that can only be given by a specialist and only in a tertiary setting. Would you agree?
I would agree.
So if somebody said that we could receive, I'm not talking about chronic medication, the ordinary light schedules, but they could just get it from the primary healthcare clinics. That could never be. Do you agree?
I agree. It would need a clinician to motivate for that medication.
Yes. And as the system works at the moment, the pharmacies at those places must order and supply the clinics. Do you agree?
True, Council.
Yes. So if somebody were just to go to the clinic and say, here I am, I want medicine, they're not going to get it for our healthcare users. Do you agree?
I agree.
And if somebody, a clinician, were to write out a script without seeing a patient, what would you say about that?
That would be unethical.
It's not something that would be in terms of the oath of doing no harm.
You would need to see the patient, evaluate the patient, and then decide on which treatment you want to put the patient on. And yeah, I would find it strange to prescribe without seeing the patient, counsel.
What would the lack of medicine and the lack of proper care have on a patient?
They would relapse. And on relapse, they would have to be admitted in a hospital.
And if that did not happen?
If that did not happen, then the problem would stay within the location where it is at when the relapse occurs.
And the absence of water and food?
Most of our users actually have this, I would say, their portions were larger than our normal portions because they wanted that. I think part of it could be from the side effects of the medication. So if they didn't have food, that would impact on that. And water, you have to have your water, otherwise you get dehydrated.
Do I understand you correctly that a side effect of the medicine could be that you need more food? Or that you want more food?
It is possible. That is why they had 4 snacks at Esidimeni.
And the 4 snacks were over and above the 3 main meals.
True, Justice.
I want to come there.
I suppose it depends on your mental stability. Doctor, then just lastly, if I could just deal with this. You went through the 2007 very huge problems. You take your oath seriously. Did you at any stage before the first patient died tell the department not there will be dire consequences, but that there will be deaths? Did you put it in such plain language to them or not?
I never put it on writing to say that there would be deaths, but they knew the 2007 experience clearly. And
you reminded them
I reminded them of that and wanted to be assured that there would be no repeat of the same incidents.
And what response did you get to that?
I was assured that the plan was fail-proof.
The plan that you couldn't see was fail-proof.
True, Counsel.
Then the very last question. I hear that you say a certain percentage of the patients must be discharged. But surely with mental health care users, you don't work with percentages. You work with a case-by-case basis.
That is true, Counsel.
So you can't say, well, I will discharge X percentage this month because you just don't know. Isn't that so?
True, Counsel. Hence the need of the quarterly reviews to motivate why these percentages were not met.
Yes. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thanks, Counsel.
Thank you, Justice.
Dr. Kenosi told us that for quite a while, the Department of Health in Gauteng has been going through a financial challenge. They've always had a budget less than the urgent demands on the department. Did you have difficulties in receiving payments for your services?
We did experience those non-payments. However, we had the cushion of the mother company who could carry us through those dry times. Justice.
And did they ultimately come around to paying you?
We were paid, yes, we were paid.
Very well. Counsel, Advocate Groenewald?
No questions from us.
You have no questions. So the good doctor has run you down, has tired you. Advocate Utamu.
Thank you, Justice. I've just taken instruction that from the account given, there will be no questions posed to the doctor.
Yes. Again, it is not unhelpful. And two negatives are a positive, aren't they? Basic mathematics, right? We have to thank you for making your time to come out and tell more the nation than us, and indeed these families, about what happened from the official end of things. But before I'm going to release you, you're probably the first who made the point in so many direct ways. The role of the Hippocratic Oath, in other words, the place of medical ethics, when clinicians are confronted with decisions that bear the probability to threaten the well-being of those in need of medical care. What do you want to say about that in this particular context? Some of the decisions, key decisions, were made by doctors.
My understanding of this situation was they made decisions under duress. My appeal would be to go back to putting the patient safety first, irrespective of whatever political pressure we experience as clinicians, to have a say in how we want our patients to be looked after in the institutions that we have.
You see, Mr. Musinogi, who's not a clinician, but if you look at all the minutes, he was a very high-ranking officer in this project. In fact, he was a project leader. Said he felt that executive compulsion, executive duress on him. Should clinicians, should doctors ever feel that way in decision making, even if they are in executive roles?
Correctly, we should not. We should be able to stand for the right thing in the clinical setting. I think we get swayed away when we then look at what the possibilities of standing for the truth is going to mean for me as a patient, as a person, not the patient first. And I think that is what led to this.
But the Hippocratic Oath is unambiguous about the duty of a doctor to provide care for starters without fear or favor, and there's a whole range of other qualificatives without regard to race, to gender, to origin, to cause of death, to political affiliation, to, isn't it?
It is true, Justice.
The oath specifies all of those distractions, things that might divert your attention when you provide health care. And should doctors deviate from that when they are in executive positions? May they?
Personally, I feel they should not. But I think when they get swallowed up in the whole place of being in a managerial position compared to being on the floor and being clinical. But correctly, we should stick true to our profession.
Not even the need for financial savings ought to make a doctor to take a decision that is irrational clinically, isn't it so?
True, Justice. The patient, the life is the primary goal for a clinician to save.
Those are my ending questions. If you want to say anything else in closure, we have consistently invited our witnesses to do so.
I just would like to say thank you to the parents, families, for standing up. This would not have happened if they did not. Thank them for standing up in the meetings which we had. Unfortunately, their voice was not heard. As part of Life Esidimeni, we share the same sentiments with you. Your loss was our loss. We knew these users as our friends when we went to the facilities. We would ask, joke up with them. Some of them would ask for money. Some of them would ask for a cigarette. I remember one who actually said, for the first time I came, said, "You look like an honest man," and then later on wanted me to buy her some cigarettes. But I'm just saying, these were people, they worked, we were family. We really enjoyed them. It took a special breed of clinicians to look after the mentally ill patients. And we were lucky that over the years, as Esidimeni, we accumulated that. And that is what gave us the competitive edge to be able to look after them appropriately. I want to assure you that we were engaged in a continuous quality improvement at Esidimeni. Whenever an incident happened, we investigated it thoroughly, and until we were fully convinced that this was exhausted, we went to the root cause. After that, we've identified the root cause, we then would put in corrective measures. Even if it happened in one facility, the corrective measures would be applied in all the facilities. So they were in good hands. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry about the loss.
Siyabonga. Nkosi.
Ngiyabonga, Justice.
There's a Swazi version of thank you.
I'm Swazi, I'm listening.
Yes. That's quite in order. I'm married to a Swazi lady, so I've learned something over the years. Anyway, shall we get back to what's important? What are we doing tomorrow, Council?
Justice Msineke, tomorrow we have Diane Noile from SABC. She has confirmed that she'll be here tomorrow morning as a witness.
That's the CEO of SABC.
That's the CEO of SABC. In fact, both the founder and the CEO have confirmed that they are available to attend, but would only require one, not both of them. So that is a witness that we have available for tomorrow. And I do understand that one of the parties, specifically Harter Spears, they do have a witness. If we do finish with Diane Noile earlier on, there will be another witness to take over, so that we finish list of our witnesses. But would make arrangements to ensure that we line up our witnesses accordingly. I do know that Section 27 as well might want to have a view about the lineup of witnesses as well. So there might be some changes on the next witness that we would call immediately after the CEO of SABC.
Yes, no, that's fine. As long as council have it under control and you're talking to each other. Absent anything, I think until the day is done. We're going to adjourn till 9:30 tomorrow morning.